Happy Friday, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Kim Young-gil in Seoul. Coming up on today's edition of Business Daily. The Korean government has decided to set up a fund to facilitate corporate restructuring with the help of creditor banks while fostering job growth and innovation. Despite government warnings, the Bitcoin frenzy in Korea has led the cryptocurrency to surpass $20,000 on Friday, with a tech-savvy and trend-sensitive population buying them en masse. These stories and more coming right up. Starting off with our top story, the Korean government has announced a plan to speed up the restructuring process in several key industries. It is hoped that the measures will help create more jobs and drive innovation, which Finance Minister Kim Dong-yeon says are essential for the Korean economy. Our Kim Ji-yeon has the details.
At a ministerial level meeting held Friday, Finance Minister Kim Dong-yeon said the government will speed up economic restructuring, aimed at creating a healthy business ecosystem as well as even wealth distribution. The government will establish state fund worth nearly $914 million by next June for the creation of new jobs and innovation.
New, quality jobs must be created on the basis of innovation. They're like two sides of a coin. Growth through innovation cannot be realized unless there's a restructuring of all existing industries regardless of their size.
The minister said it'll provide guidelines for regular state inspections of Korea's key industries, such as the struggling shipbuilding industry, which he says will be revamped with specific measures next year. He says the government will minimize the state burden in supporting these core industries by using a market-based approach and weaning them off their reliance on state-run banks for funding. The central government will also consult with local governments and experts to minimize risks during the restructuring. Kim urged the ministries to promptly allocate budget funds on creating new jobs starting in January. Kim Ji-yeon, Business Daily.
Korea had long been the leader in the global shipbuilding industry, but it looks like Korea will trail behind China in terms of orders for the 7th consecutive year. According to Clarkson's research, the total amount of global ship orders in November hit 1.4 million compensated gross tonnage from 58 ships, up 400,000 tons from October. This amounts to a total of 19.5 million compensated gross tons for the year running up to November, up 7.8 million from the same period last year. China accounted for more than 36% of those global ship orders, followed by Korea's 29% and Japan's 9%. Korea's very first energy self-sufficient apartment has been revealed to the public. After nearly 5 years in development, President Moon Jae-in was at the event and said more such buildings are needed to help phase out nuclear power and fossil fuels. Our Hwang Ho-jun reports.
4 years and about $45 million of investment later since the launch of the project, the nation's very first energy self-sufficient apartment complex is open for viewers. President Moon Jae-in had plenty of compliments for the so-called Energy Zero House, or Easy House for short. For the South Korean president, the new apartment complex in Nowon-gu district is an emblem of his key environmental policy, shifting away from nuclear and coal-fired power plants while implementing and increasing clean and renewable energy.
그런 정책이 성공하려면 여기저기에 에너지 자립 마을 또 에너지 자립 아파트 단지들 많이 이제 생겨나야 됩니다.
A total of 121 households are set to move in, 80% of them newlyweds and 10% senior citizens. The South Korean president said the Nowon Easy House, a model of self-sufficiency, dramatically conserves energy while producing essential power. President Moon called the project significant because the central government got involved and worked with related ministries, local governments, scholars, and local residents. He underscored that nearly every design and material used in the Easy House was produced in Korea, saying that proves Seoul is more than capable of independently opening an era of new energy. According to the Ministry of Land, Infrastructure and Transport, the Easy House will allow residents to save up to $900 of energy costs a year, as the building creates enough energy for cooling, ventilation, and lighting. It has 1,300 solar panels, and each unit was built using energy-saving technology, including triple-glazed windows, aluminum blinds, and high-quality insulation. The concrete walls are twice as thick as ordinary buildings, which is why the apartment building can maintain a temperature of 20 degrees Celsius during winter without heating. Geothermal energy is also used to provide additional heat. Hwang Woo-jun, Business Daily.
Ahead of next week's Korea-China summit, the Chinese media is expressing hopes the two countries could move on from the THAAD controversy and mend their diplomatic ties. But some experts say it's too early to tell whether Presidents Moon Jae-in and Xi Jinping will be able to work out all of their differences. Our Lee Ji-won has more.
Just a day after South Korean President Moon Jae-in's visit to China next week was confirmed, several Chinese media outlets reported on the news, hinting that it could serve as an opportunity to mend the relationship between the two countries. The China Times on Wednesday reported that Seoul and Beijing are now moving away from their disagreement on South Korea's deployment of the THAAD missile defense system, and that President Moon will be visiting China next Wednesday to meet Chinese President Xi Jinping and discuss their diplomatic ties, as well as the issue of North Korea's nuclear weapons development. State newspaper The People's Daily and other local media outlets quoted Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Lu Kang and highlighted that the Chinese Foreign Ministry is hoping that President Moon's visit would improve Seoul-Beijing ties. With China's recent partial removal of a ban on group tours to Korea, some news agencies quoted experts who were hopeful that the visit would thaw ties and improve Chinese public sentiment toward Korea. But others are still skeptical about the unresolved THAAD row.
THAAD will definitely come up as one of the topics discussed during their meeting, especially with the latest missile launch from North Korea. And this is very tricky, as the two countries haven't changed their stance on the issue.
But the expert added President Moon can offer a counter-proposal this time.
President Moon could suggest to President Xi that if Pyongyang does not further develop nuclear weapons or carry out missile launches, Seoul could possibly consider the so-called three no's.
The three no's are no additional THAAD deployment, no participation in the U.S. missile defense network, and no establishment of a trilateral military alliance with the U.S. and Japan. The expert said this could also pressure China to increase its role in halting North Korea's nuclear development. Lee Ji-won, Business Daily.
The number of Chinese tourists visiting Korea may have fallen this year, but Incheon International Airport has seen a record number of passengers. Chinese travelers to Korea have plunged nearly 40% on year amid diplomatic tensions between Seoul and Beijing over THAAD issues. Despite this, with several weeks left to go in the year, Incheon Airport has already handled more international passengers than its total from 2016. As of December 5th, some 53.7 million people have entered and left the country through Incheon, with the number expected to top 58 million by year end. Now let's get a quick check on how the markets fared here in Seoul today. For that, we connect with our Lee Ju-young on the phone. Ju-young.
I'm Young-gil. At the closing bell, the benchmark Kospi inched up 0.08% and at 2464, while the junior Kosdaq dropped 1.25% at 744.06. On the foreign exchange counter, the Korean won strengthened to 1,093.31 against the greenback. While many stocks on the Kospi have been falling recently, the rise of tech-related stocks have underpinned the broader market. For one, Samsung Electronics surged 2.48%, while chipmaker SK hynix also increased 3.55% on Friday. Foreign investors, on the other hand, continued to offload shares, dumping a net $55 million worth of stocks on Friday in anticipation of a possible rate hike by the U.S. Federal Reserve next Thursday.
And it also looks like the Kospi is catching its breath after reaching some record highs recently.
That's right. According to KB Securities, the Kospi's 20-day trading yield as of yesterday plunged 3.5%, making this the third largest adjustment since the main index hit the 2000 level. Experts cite external factors like U.S. tax reforms and profit-taking in the IT and healthcare sectors as the main reasons, and advise investors to use this correction period to buy as the upward trend is set to continue in the long term. This has been Lee Ju-young for Business Daily.
Bitcoin's value has been off the charts recently, and in Korea, the purchase price is at a significant premium. The currency's value surpassed $15,000 this morning and is nearing a sale price of $20,000 domestically. Here's our Kim with more.
South Korea has become a hot zone for Bitcoin trading in recent months, with the nation already having seen one-day trading volume surpass $2 billion. The virtual currency's value has seen a tremendous surge the past few days, but markets based in the Korean won are seeing prices significantly higher than the global average. Korea's largest exchange, Bithumb, saw prices soar from just over $12,000 at the end of Tuesday to nearly $22,764 around 9:30 this morning. This from a cryptocurrency that was trading at under $8,000 just a month ago. Korea's price far exceeds the $17,539 high for markets based in US dollars by 23% per Brave New Coin. The Financial Services Commission banning Bitcoin futures and other derivatives tied to Bitcoin hasn't stopped the growth. Bitcoin trading has become a normal transaction for casual Korean investors, despite the country accounting for just 1.9% of the global GDP. A whopping 21% of transactions occur here. Financial authorities are planning to pay close attention to speculative increases in virtual currencies, as well as the frequency of illegal activity, especially crimes like fraud and money laundering. Security will also be an issue, with Bithumb suffering from a cyber attack in July that resulted in the loss of millions of dollars from 31,800 users. Kim, Business Daily.
Retail giant 신세계 is set to reduce their employees' work hours to 35 hours per week starting from next year, from the current 40-hour work week. The hours will be reduced without a wage cut and applies to all of their employees at department stores, duty-free shops, and supermarkets. This is in line with the government's push to bring down the number of annual working hours to below 1,800 from an average of 2,069 hours last year. 신세계 is the first conglomerate in the country to implement this type of policy, but opinions are still divided as to whether or not it'll be adopted in the overall retail sector. Industry watchers say while serving good intentions, it remains to be seen how 신세계 can manage to maintain its current pay level when overtime is a big part of regular wages in the industry. The Korean government has unveiled a long-term multi-million-dollar plan to develop unmanned vehicle technology in hopes to make the country one of the sector's global leaders by 2030. Our Kim Mo-kyun reports.
The Ministry of Science and ICT revealed its 10-year plan to develop the nation's unmanned vehicle industry, focusing on drones, self-driving cars, and unmanned ships. The ministry says with the long-term plan, South Korea could rank third in the industry with a market share of 10% by the year 2030. Currently, Korea ranks 7th in the world for drone technology, but it is heavily dependent on imported equipment, even for crucial technology in autonomous cars, cameras, and radar. Vice Minister Lee Jin-gyu said that the ministry will focus on unmanned vehicles, stressing that they are working with industry experts to secure these key technologies. Local engineers are planning to develop autonomous vehicles and drones that can be combined and separated from each other, multi-purpose airplanes that can turn into undersea vehicles, and even aerial drones that can carry people in a small cockpit. The ministry said that it will first inject some $11 million for research and development next year and another $500 million over the next decade. It is aiming to create some 92,000 jobs by 2030. Kim Mo-kyun, Business Daily.
Mobile data traffic used across the globe is forecast to spike 8-fold by 2023. According to Ericsson Mobility Report, mobile data usage is expected to reach 110 exabytes within 5 years, compared to this year's projection of 14 exabytes. Of the amount, the proportion of video content is expected to rise from 55% to 75% on the back of developments in content and communications technology. Social media's share of the data is expected to drop from the current 12% to 8% in 2023. More and more people in North Korea are now using smartphones, with 1 in 6 people in the country owning a device, but their rise may actually help the Kim Jong-un regime tighten its grip. According to researchers at Johns Hopkins University, 4 million people in North Korea now have smartphones, a 4-fold increase from 2012. But they say the phones are more of a propaganda tool, using a state-run operating system and content limited to Kim Jong-un's speeches and North Korean culture. The regime also monitors what people see on their phones. Pundits say Pyongyang is allowing and encouraging the use of these devices to make its citizens feel they are living just as well as neighboring countries. Time now for a look through some important global business news from the week, with Eunice Kim joining us in the studio. Hello, Eunice.
Hi, Myung-gil.
Now, a very controversial decision by U.S. President Donald Trump this week that publicly recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Myung-gil. This is, of course, a potentially explosive move given the very fragile peace arrangement in the Middle East between the Israelis and the Palestinians. President Donald Trump defended the move as fulfilling a campaign promise and that it is the right thing to do. Take a listen.
Today, we finally acknowledge the obvious, that Jerusalem is Israel's capital. This is nothing more or less than a recognition of reality. It is also the right thing to do.
With the acknowledgement, President Trump has begun the process of moving the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, a shift wholeheartedly welcomed by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The ancient city is, of course, regarded as a holy site of 3 faiths, the Jews, Christians, and the Muslims. Jews and Palestinians had engaged in years of war, having both staked Jerusalem as its capital. Neither claim has been internationally recognized until now. Already, the angry response sparked. Hundreds, if not thousands, poured out onto the streets, from the U.S. Embassy in Ankara, Turkey, to a Palestinian refugee camp in Jordan.
This decision will not pass, not in your dreams. It will not pass over the dead bodies of Arabs and bodies of Palestinians. We are here in the diaspora in every location. We will fight this decision. We will fight this decision with iron and fire. We call on the Palestinian leadership to resist.
In the Gaza Strip and the occupied West Bank, dozens were reported injured in clashes with Israeli soldiers amid a barrage of flying tear gas, rubber bullets, and burning tires. Leaders from Germany, France, Indonesia, and the Saudi royal court have all condemned America's unilateral move. Turkey's President Tayyip Erdogan said Trump was throwing the region into a ring of fire. Palestinian Islamist group Hamas has already called for ditching peace talks for a new uprising, as Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas said this declaration, quote, would end the peace process. The United Nations is set to meet later on this Friday to explore a response.
Now, turning closer to home, another major announcement. The International Olympic Committee ruled this week that Russia will be banned from Pyeongchang Winter Games.
Yeah, that's right. This was, of course, a well-telegraphed possibility, Myung-gil, but it pinched nonetheless for host country Korea, given the powerhouse that Russia is when it comes to international athletic competitions. Following a thorough review, the IOC Executive Board announced it would suspend Russia's participation from the Pyeongchang Olympics in February. While no athlete would be allowed to compete under a Russian flag, it did say that individuals could still
still participate on an invitation-only basis following a review process, the details of which has yet to be made public. Russian President Vladimir Putin dismissed the decision as, quote, totally scripted and politically motivated, pointing to a March presidential election. But he did say Moscow would not boycott the games, freeing up the possibility that some, including Korean-turned-Russian short-track star Victor An, could still compete. Russia had been under fire for years on allegations it ran a state-sponsored doping program specifically ahead of the 2014 Sochi Olympics to bulk up their athletes, as well as a cover-up that ensued.
Now, in some M&A news, the Disney is reportedly in talks with Rupert Murdoch Empire to buy much of its media business.
That's right. We're talking about 21st Century Fox, as well as Murdoch's stake in Sky TV, that's British TV, of course, streaming service Hulu, as well as cable networks like National Geographic. What it's not believed to include is the Fox News channel, Fox Broadcasting Networks, and its sports rights, according to reports. The discussions to take on most of Rupert Murdoch's media business reemerged earlier this week after apparently hitting a snag last month. According to sources familiar with the talks, a deal between the two media giants could surface as early as next week. News we will be keeping an eye on. And finally, Time magazine has unveiled its most influential person of the year. Beating out runners-up presidents Donald Trump and Xi Jinping were a group simply called the Silence Breakers, represented by a few familiar faces on the cover, like actress Ashley Judd and singer Taylor Swift. Inside the magazine, hundreds of women were featured, all joined in their bold standing up to sexual harassment and assault, epitomized by the social media hashtag #MeToo.
About a month ago, our editor-in-chief, Edward Felsenthal, took a look at a lineup we'd made, a timeline of all the women who'd stepped up this year to speak out against sexual harassment. And he was so moved by the sheer volume of the number of women who'd stepped up that he said, this has to be it. And that kind of echoes what we're saying about this movement, is that you just can't ignore this many women. It's too many, and their voices are too strong.
The U.S. has seen some high-flying names fall from grace in recent weeks on the back of sexual abuse allegations, starting with Hollywood power broker Harvey Weinstein, NBC's Today Show anchor Matt Lauer, to most recently disgraced Democratic Senator Al Franken, a former comedian and actor.
Well, certainly brave women there breaking their silence.
Absolutely.
And I'm sure their voices will be heard for decades in ways we can't even begin to measure.
We'll see.
That brings us to the end of our program. Do join us again next week for more business news that matters to you. Have a great weekend, and until then, goodbye.